Hey everybody, welcome back to our series, Don't Be Dumb. We got some dumb people around us and we've got a lot of wise people, and so we're not really sure which category you fit into, but hopefully you've had a chance in your groups to discuss the dumbest things you have ever done. The ones that you can speak of course.
Naturally, not off camera.
Yes, right, of course. But listen, we're going to be talking today about relationships. You're an expert on relationships.
I had two of them. And one I married, so yeah.
Well, okay, we're not actually talking about dating relationships.
Oh, then I've had four of them.
Okay, so. Two friendships, one person he dated that didn't work, and then his wife. So that's good. Well, we're going to talk about relationships, and they can be really of all sorts. And maybe the first question is what do you think is the most foundational issue when it comes to having a healthy relationship?
Foundational. Well, I think, we've done enough marriage counseling and premarital counseling that communication seems to come up a lot,
right?
At least in dating relationships. But I think that does tie over to just even relationships, that it comes to trust and accountability and communication. Right. And I just think that the relationships that seem to stand the test of time have those as a foundational core.
Yeah, trust is really the issue that when you ask people what's the most important thing in a relationship, and they usually are talking about dating relationships or marital relationships, the number one issue is trust. And one of the things that we have looked at down through the years is that we use it in counseling, that you have this trust tank or this love tank, and you make deposits into the trust tank because ultimately all of us do some things that make withdrawals out of that. And so it's important to make sure that you build that up over time. And it's a little bit weird because, and the only problem with that particular analogy is that some people are so dysfunctional that they think that if you give people money or talk nicely to people or whatever, that you can do even abusive things to that person and kind of make that type of withdrawal, and that's not healthy.
Yeah, we talked about that this week, and you and I were talking about, just some people will say like, well, if I did this poorly to somebody, I can buy them a gift to fill that back up. But that's a misunderstanding of it. It's more of, hey, I want to fill my love tank, because there are times where I'm just going to be busy or absent, or I'm just going to make a bad decision and I'm going to make a withdrawal without even planning on it. It's just going to happen.
Right, yeah. And we were talking earlier as we were kind of preparing for Sunday's message, we were talking about that every person has expectations going into a relationship, but they're not always stated. So if someone's like thinking, if I lose my job, the people that are my friends will call me. Now, they never had, they didn't sign a contract on that, but that's their expectations, and that may or may not be what you believe should be true of a friendship. And so how do you kind of deal with that when someone has expectations that are different than what you plan to bring to the relationship?
Yeah, well, once again, not to spend too much time on dating relationships, but I just had a premarital counseling session last week, and what I try to do with those is to say, okay, tell me what you picture marriage being like, because they're sitting across from each other and they really think, hey, we agree on this, and then they start stating it and they're like, oh, that wasn't my expectation. But here's what I found to be true.
Well, or even simple things as like, are we going to share the toothpaste tube? One whatever.
I know.
Or are you going to use the bathroom with the door open or closed? Those are like the weirdest things, but they really do come into play.
No, they do. And people, the funny thing about it is they assume, they go, and then they disagree. And they're like, oh, we don't think the same on these things. And so you try to get ahead of these things, because once again, when you're dating, there's a lot more, just kind of open conversation. And then you get to a marriage and you're like, oh my gosh, like these expectations were completely different. And what I found to be true is that what your parents were like, those are the expectations you have. And so you have people who maybe come from a dysfunctional family and somebody comes from a very healthy family. They look very similar on the surface, and then they get married and they go, I can't believe you're yelling at me. Like, that's what my parents did. And they're like, my parents never yelled at each other. And it is so far off the spectrum.
Or when my wife, one of the things we do is when we have our dinner, she puts it out on the I guess the bar top there in our kitchen. She puts all the food out there, and you go through with your plate and you fill your plate, and then you sit down and you wait for everyone to get there and you pray. In my home, we put it down. When I was growing up, there were 4 of us, and we had assigned seats, of course, and we sat there, and then we passed the food to one another, and we'd say, have some squash and pass it, or have some beans and pass it, or have some meatloaf and pass it. And so that's how I grew up. So even to this day, it's a little bit strange, and I realize my kids would be weirded out if one day they were in a family where you sat down and passed the food to each other.
Don and Nancy wouldn't stand for that.
They would not
stand for that. They draw a line right there.
They certainly do. They certainly do. You know, and so I think that what you're saying is true. One of the things that if you are talking to someone who possibly is considering getting married, there is an inventory out there. You can email me, dgriffin@clifec.com, dgriffin@clifec.com. And the reason why, if you know someone that's maybe getting married, there's this inventory, and it's not going to necessarily tell you, whether or not how many kids you should have, but it's going to identify your different opinions about kids and how you're going to raise kids. And so that happens a lot. So this really isn't about dating relationships or anything, but
it's not. But I think the real danger of it is that when you don't have those conversations, and then you're in the marriage, and you almost feel like you were duped. And you weren't duped, it's just you didn't have these conversations up front because a pastor didn't prompt you or push you, or somebody didn't say, hey, just take a few minutes and look at this inventory. So I think it has implications.
Right. You know, when I think of relationships, one of the things that I realize is that we have to make sure that we are listening to the other person. You can't just go to the relationship and figure out how you can dump on that person. You have to figure out how you can listen, how you can bring value to the relationship. How do you do that, even in your friendships? How do you bring value, or how do you think of bringing value to that relationship?
Well, I mean, you want to enter into their life. And so I think a couple of things that come with that is that as a friend, I'm going to speak truth to that person.
Right.
And so it is so easy to, especially in the 21st century, to love people. And what they mean by that is, I'm going to support you no matter what you do. I'm going to encourage you. Where I want to come and say, hey man, this may cost our relationship, but I love you enough to tell you the truth, even though you may not want to hear the truth.
Right.
So I think I'm going to bring truth to the relationship. I think I'm going to bring support to the relationship. And so that, some of my friends have gone through some really tough stuff, and some have come and, visited our house for a couple of days just to get away. And I just, man, whatever you need for 3 days, I'm here to serve you.
Right.
And so I think you provide that love that's truthful, but you're supporting them through the mess.
Yeah. Let me read you this. This passage. One of the proverbs that we talked about on Sunday is, "Better is open rebuke than hidden love.
Yeah.
Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy."
That's so true.
So if you just have a friend that is constantly telling you what you want to hear, that's not really a friend.
No. I mean, it's like they're championing you all the way to hell. Like I want somebody that's going to jump in front of me and just go, man, you may push me down, but I'm at least going to try to stop you from your own demise, from falling apart.
Yeah, and I think that's really what a friend is a person that walks alongside of you and really has your best interest at heart. Do you find yourself ever being selfish when you walk into a relationship? In other words, you think only what can I get out of it, not what can I bring to it?
Yeah, I think almost all of us in our flesh naturally do that. I mean, that's what we're scanning the room for the person that can help us. We're scanning the conversation to see how it can benefit us. I think if we are not consciously thinking about that, we're doing it. You know what I mean? Because once again, we're deviating to our flesh. I mean, we, by nature, Scripture tells us that we are fallen creatures that are deceitful.
Yeah, our heart is deceitful above all
It really
things.
is. In Romans 3, it talks about, no one seeks God, no one seeks righteousness. Nobody wakes up in the morning a good person.
Right.
It's something that we have to fight. And so that's where I look at people and say, hey, how are you consciously working against this? Oh, I'm not. Well, then you're not. I mean, you're just, if you are not actively pursuing righteousness, you are not being righteous. Like it's a struggle.
Yeah, and of course, we can quickly become users of other people, and then dispose that person when the person's no longer useful to us. And that's a challenge, whether it be at work or in our friendships or in our dating relationships. I mean, you kind of see this, and people get gun shy about relationships because they have been burned.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember my dad used to say that what makes something dangerous usually makes it good.
Yeah.
And so when you think about a relationship, whatever makes that relationship good also makes the relationship dangerous.
Yeah.
Have you found that?
No, absolutely.
That's why you only dated two people.
That's why I only dated two people. I learned
because you didn't want to.
No, but I mean, I think there is. I mean, there's positives to everything and there's negatives to everything. And so once again, you see this in relationships. The thing that you love about a person over time sometimes becomes the thing that you hate the most about the person.
Right.
So you're drawn to the person who's magnetic and the room just is around them. And then after a while, you're like, there they go again, you know? And it's like the thing that drew you to them now is the most frustrating thing about them. And so I think that every single element, if it's not checked, can be dangerous to a relationship.
So none of us were created to be a lone wolf.
No.
None of us were to walk by ourselves. We are communal and relational beings.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is what it means to be created in the image of God, don't you?
Well, I mean, the Trinity is threefold. You know,
Right.
God was never a separate entity. And so I think there's some implications there that it was Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Right.
And so once again, for the person that's like, I don't need friends, I don't need community, I don't need a relationship, my thing is, that's not biblical at all.
Right.
Like the model was never to be alone.
And maybe you could talk about that, spend a little bit of time in your group talking about times or seasons and when you thought you could be a lone wolf and kind of go it alone, and how God brought you out of that, and the relationships, important relationships that help move you to a better understanding of community and, you know, the value of relationship. That might be a good thing to talk about.
Yeah. And I think that's it. You know, we talk all the time about community groups. Get in a community group. We want you in a community group. But once again, we want people in community groups because that's where spiritual growth happens the best. And it's because people have hard conversations, and it's so easy to hide as a Christian. And so I can tune this out, I can ignore this. But when you find yourself in a group with some really good relationships, people are going to call you out, and they're going to encourage you, and they're going to push you to be what God's called you to be.
So once again, we're talking about connecting people to God and one another. That's what we're all about. And so all of this, all of our relationships have a spiritual element to it. It's not just wise, it's also spiritual. And so we want to make sure that you understand the importance of that.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we appreciate you for tuning in this week and being a part of our small group discussion. We are looking forward to finishing out this series, Don't Be Dumb. I hope that you enjoyed your Mother's Day, and we are looking forward to the remainder of the series. God bless you.